All right. Well, Sean is in the room. We're waiting on one more of our guests, but I want to take a few minutes to get started. I want to welcome everybody to our virtual launch of libertyintech.org. Libertyintech.org, just to kind of give everybody a brief history, was basically the rebrand of South Carolina Bitcoin Blockchain Week, our first live conference back in October 2022. Due to unforeseen circumstances, we moved it into a virtual event, and we're so pleased to have everybody together with us today to celebrate, essentially preserving our rights and freedom and privacies. And the event was specifically scheduled and organized just a week before next week's consensus event in Austin, which will be featuring a lot of the projects. Obviously, the projects that we've invited on the decentralized AI side. Talking about other freedom technologies, but certainly a big player in the and influential in the decentralized movement in both currencies and AI. Um, Obviously, we stand at a crucial juncture where we are now at a point where we must actually make choices between the dystopian future that was depicted by George Orwell in 1984, or regain the principles that Thomas Jefferson represents in 1776. By launching Liberty in Tech, we are asserting our rights to privacy. Permissionless transactions is guaranteed to us by Article 4 of the Constitution. We're affirming that individuals have the right to privacy, autonomy in our democratic and republican society. I want to take an opportunity to thank all of our sponsors at this point, with obviously without whose support made this event possible, and we couldn't do it without them. So I want to take a moment to acknowledge Phoenix Technologies, a world leader in Bitcoin mining and data centers around the world, with facilities in South Carolina. Citizens for Sound Money, advocating for gold and silver depositories, return to some semblance of hard money in our state as well as nationally, and working to make our money worth something. We also want to thank the Satoshi Action Fund for their work in educating and advocating for our right to self custody throughout the country, as well as sponsoring our blockchain basics bill that was introduced into the South Carolina State Legislature earlier this year as an effort to bring definitions, to the state. We are also grateful to our my personal State Farm agent, John Acker, for supporting our efforts, and also to our newest corporate member, Chappell and Newman. And I want to individually recognize Graham Newman, who's attending today, and a leader in the blockchain industry law in South Carolina. Excuse me a second. I've got to turn my phone off here. There we go. One minor glitch, but this event is important. It's an important opportunity to recognize the contributions of Scott Stornetta, one of our speakers today, and my co-moderator. Scott and his research partner, Scott Haber, were the inventors of blockchain technology and an underlying technology in Bitcoin. His invention has brought us all together, united by our common interest in securing our rights and freedoms. Uh, and before we get started, I do want to take an opportunity to let everybody know that we do have a statement today from the state treasurer's office. Unfortunately, the treasurer was ill and was unable to join us. Even Edward, was coming down with something, but I do want to recognize his aide, Edward Frazier, for stepping into the breach, and he's recorded an introduction. Wish them both return to good health and participation in the future. Finally, I want to take the opportunity to encourage everybody to subscribe to our channel, and I also want to, also acknowledge our Bitcoin, Satoshi Nakamoto, for bringing us all together. Needless to say, I learned a long time ago that a lot of this is really how we relate, this groundbreaking technology to other folks. And I do want to recognize the folks that are in this group that are going to be talking about Bitcoin as freedom money. So I'll take my hat off and let's continue. So, Ed, Roger, if we can cue up the video.
Good afternoon. I'm Edward Frazier, and on behalf of State Treasurer Curtis Loftis, it is my pleasure to welcome you all to the Liberty in Tech virtual conference. Unfortunately, the Treasurer is sick today and asked I provide his following remarks. I know Dennis and the SC Emerging Technologies Association team have put together an informative agenda and an outstanding lineup of speakers who will educate and enlighten us about the continued emergence of digital assets and its potential to revolutionize how we think about our financial systems. Like many of my counterparts, I have been studying the emergence of cryptocurrencies and blockchain technologies for a couple of years now, trying to understand what they are and decipher the best ways to employ them for the benefit of the state. We know that the rapidly expanding digital asset space is part of a larger trend of the digitization of finance. As the state's banker, I recognize the importance of being at the forefront of this movement, as well as the need to understand the disruptive changes these technologies offer and the potential opportunities for our state and citizens. That said, we are working to provide both private citizens and our public agencies with information that will help grow their knowledge and understanding of digital assets and blockchain technologies. A couple of years ago, I was fortunate to visit El Salvador with Dennis and several others to see firsthand how this country has adopted Bitcoin as their legal tender. It was amazing how quickly their population adapted to using Bitcoin, and I look forward to learning more about their progress. South Carolina, on the other hand, has a unique opportunity. We are the first state in the country to have a House Committee on Artificial Intelligence, Cybersecurity, and Cybercrime. Their purpose is to study AI and related areas of cybercrime and cybersecurity and develop strategies to safeguard the rights and interests of South Carolina citizens, which highlights the need for all South Carolinians to be digitally educated. I am grateful for the opportunity to act as a lead agent for our state as we navigate this journey of understanding and acceptance of digital assets. Improving digital currency literacy within our state is a current goal for my agency. How digital currencies eventually integrate into artificial intelligence is a topic I look forward to learning more about today. The future of technology is bright because of groups like this one who are meeting, discussing, and forming the future of technology to ensure it is for the betterment of the people and not infringing upon them. That is what liberty in tech means to me. Thank you again for having me today, and I look forward to hearing our upcoming speakers and their thoughts about the opportunities and challenges we face.
Great. I want to thank Edward for stepping into the breach here. We've been talking all week about the treasurer's comments, and obviously the support that they provide us is invaluable. Scott, I want to take a moment. Begin our introductions with you. Obviously, you've been so formative in the underlying technology that brought us Bitcoin. The now move into the decentralized AI and interest in trust mechanisms, that are being designed for, the intelligent platforms, that we look forward to talking to together. And I guess probably let me just hand it off to you, perhaps with a little more, background for our audience. And I find you're probably the most unknown character in the Bitcoin story, but certainly the most broadly, published in that regard. So, let me hand it off to you.
Well, I appreciate the chance to speak, Dennis, and I do want to underscore a couple of fundamental things before talking about any particulars at all. And the first is that for us, laying the foundations for the blockchain as it's used by essentially every cryptocurrency in the world and for other purposes, more about which later, the fundamental realization for Dr. Haber and myself was that there is something that can be created when we devolve trust to a very broad group of people that was never possible before. And that is really a statement that, in a very deep and philosophical sense, goes at the heart of liberty, namely that the people can self-regulate and create systems of value without the need for a central government to approve each action. Um, I think that goes to the heart of what we're looking for as we talk about such issues as liberty and limited government. And so the blockchain enables this new kind of way for us to interact with each other and surely reinforces the concept that we can have uh, inalienable liberties that don't have to be mediated by a central authority. Um, I do want to say a couple of other things there. And then at the very end, I have an apology that I need to make that has to do with retrieving my power cord and moving to a different location so it's quieter. So that's my coda that is a coming attraction. Um, I do think it's important that we distinguish between the fact that obviously the greatest attention has been paid to cryptocurrencies, but that fundamentally a blockchain is a universal ledger, a um, a a system that we all hold collectively that confers on us the 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 authority to interact in a peer-to-peer way. And so, while the cryptocurrency aspect is dominant, we are going to have some discussions today about other ways that this decentralization thrust is supportive of our liberties. It's really a fundamental technology and a fundamental attitude that allows us to uh, expand and protect our liberties in an increasingly technologized world. I think we're going to have a lot from the different speakers, and so I'm going to try to stay um, with them in the spotlight and try to draw out the innovations that they're coming up with. Um, but I'm very proud to support this effort, and people should know that liberty was at the heart of our liberty, and the peer-to-peer management of our lives was at the heart of our thinking, even in the early days about the blockchain. Now, my coda, I have to, um, I have to go retrieve that power cord and move to a quieter space to make the rest of the meeting a success. So please allow me those 2 minutes that I need to do that.
Please, thank you so much, Scott. Shauna, let me hand it off to you. Obviously, what does Liberty Tech mean to you? Tell us about guardrail technologies and a little uh, expanded introduction as well.
Awesome. Thank
Not
you.
necessarily in that order. So,
Well, we'll talk. I'm so excited to be here today and to get to share the stage with Dennis. You have done so many amazing things for the industry. So thank you so much for, really lead that leadership and leading the helm, especially in your state. Of course, Scott. I mean, wow. As you had said, kind of the quiet voice behind so many of the amazing inventions that really sparked blockchain. So it's fun for me. I had first when I had first met Scott, somebody said, "Oh, the inventor of blockchain," and he's in the back room. Everybody looks over and goes, "Satoshi," which is kind of fun. And Scott and I, of course, have had parodies throughout the years as I tease him because he knows Japanese and will never claim to be, but it's a lot of fun. So I digress. I just definitely want to jump into liberty. What does liberty mean to me? I really sat honestly in quiet thinking about this because we are in such a massive transition right now. If we were to step back and to think about where we've been, many of us, I just turned 50. I think a lot of you are probably about the same age, a little older, a little younger. But the technology advancements we've seen during our lifetime, it was the world of going out to play and your parents had no idea where you were, but when it turned dark, you better be back home. Now I'm looking at Finder going, oh my gosh, you're 5 minutes away. It's about midnight. You better get your butt home. So sorry about that. But if we think about, the technology advancements that we've had during our lifetime, even as a parent, it is outstanding. And freedom has really changed. So when we looked at, when I really started to look at it and even dive in a little bit deeper, we can definitely jump into philosophy and what liberty truly means. But if we step back, really it's the cornerstone of our democracy. And society is changing. When we jumped into the fifth industrial revolution, some people will say it was 2020. I really want to say it was really when ChatGPT was launched, November 20th, 22nd of 2022. That really changed our world. Even for many of us who've been in AI for a long time, we started to see that the entire world had access to this extremely powerful technology and could overnight see the power that we've been seeing for so many years. And it's the good, the bad, and the ugly. What I love to say is AI especially is it's almost like a conglomeration of all of us. So it's all of our data. It's the smartest of us. It's the dumbest of us. It's the middle. It's the average of us. It's all of us. And the AI is trying to grab the next best answer to help us with our problems and help us solve our problems. And as we look at liberty, in the most fundamental sense, it's that state of being free within a society. So from the oppressive restrictions of authority, anyone who's trying to get into, our world to move our behavior, move our political views, liberty can be encroached upon. Any system, any human being who tries to get in the way, that really does encroach on a human being's freedom and also, could encroach on our liberty. So if we were to start to look at the newest technologies that are out there, let's talk about personal liberty. The freedom of individuals to be able to make choices without undue interference. We have so much interference right now. We have AI, we have our phones, we have TikTok. You can flip through and get about 30 different opinions. And so our personal liberties really are, there's so many issues that we have today because there's so much information out there. Sorry, Dennis, if you're jumping in, go ahead and jump in.
No, I actually, I want to underscore what you're saying. Your point about, just making sure your kids are at home at a certain time for the most part. I mean, I remember as a child myself, we were free to run.
Yeah.
When I heard my father's whistle, that's when we came home at that point. But then as society matured, obviously technology impacted. I mean, insurance companies trying to limit their liability. I mean, there's a whole list of things that have imposed on our rights as private individuals and impacted our lifestyle and really narrowed that that free and independent spirit, and really tried to shovel us into in my personal opinion is as sheep. I mean, pure and simple, to be sort of herded together and and told what to do. So it really was not until my third read of Bitcoin, or third exposure to Bitcoin, that I recognized, the importance of, the peer-to-peer aspect of a financial system. So, obviously, I want to thank you, Shauna, for what you're doing. We do want to get into your project a little bit, in more depth, obviously, but I'll take the opportunity to move on to our next speaker. We've got Eric Breivik is teared up. Eric, you perhaps can lead us into David's introduction as well, since you guys are certainly connected in that regard.
Yeah, absolutely. So, hi, I'm Eric Breivik. I'm really a neuroscientist who's fallen into all of this. I've been in AI for about 35 years and did my first Bitcoin mining about 14 years ago. So I would say 14 years in crypto. I'm with an organization called the Lifted Initiative. Our primary focus is maintaining the freedoms of democracy for the country. And our focus on AI is really about maintaining what we believe is the most fundamental freedom, which is freedom of thought. I'm sure David will echo some of this. I'm very much looking forward to hearing what David has to say as well. So I won't steal too much of his thunder here. I'll keep it short. But we're I do want to say one really fundamental thing, because I believe in really only leaving one golden nugget behind for everyone to remember, which is that AI is fundamentally about thought. It's about the most fundamental thing that makes us human. We can talk about all the other liberties we have. They all derive from our liberty to think, from our freedom to think, right? And freedom of speech, economic freedom, all of these things are derivative of our freedom to think. And that is what AI is moving to replace and or augment and or attack, depending on how we structure this next coming wave of technological revolution. Shauna just spoke about other forms of tech that have changed things greatly for our world. The next 10 years will make the last 10 years look like baby town frolics, right? This pace of change is going to accelerate massively from here. So if you're already feeling overwhelmed, get ready for the future. It's going to be much worse than that. And that's accelerated by what we loosely call AI. AI done incorrectly, which my argument is we are doing it largely incorrectly right now, is the final human invention. It is the thing that will enslave us if we do not pay attention and we do not get control of this. And interestingly, by control, I mean removing centralized control, right? I mean the only path forward for keeping AI free, keeping your thought free, keeping the world free and America free as the leader of the free world, which I still believe it is to decentralize this technology. And honestly, I don't want to say too much more than that, because I really only want the people listening to this to take that away with them. This must be a call to action. AI will be the final human invention if we do it incorrectly, or it will be the gateway to great things if we do it correctly. And we are at that precipice now. You are seeing the beginnings of the real heat up of this struggle now. And if we don't get our foothold, this is going to move so fast that we're going to lose control before we know it. Again, my argument is we already have profoundly lost control. And we need to do something about it. We need action at the individual level. We need action at the government level. We need action at the economic level. We need action at the corporate level. We need action everywhere. And so with that, I'm going to tee it off to David. David is one of the figures in the Morpheus movement, and I'll let him explain what that's all about. Thanks for your time.
Awesome. Thanks, Eric. No, I appreciate those kind words. And I couldn't agree more. You know, the importance of having free and truly open source AI, a personal AI that is connected to each individual, right? Where they own the data, they set its tasks, they provide the preferences. The importance of a personal AI cannot be overemphasized, right? And as Eric said, we're at this tipping point right now. And I feel like I spent the last 9 months as Paul Revere saying, the regulators are coming, the regulators are coming. And, you know, I hope now it seems like people are really paying attention ever since the executive order came out, which was really pretty draconian, right? A proposal effectively to centralize most of the AI power in the hands of a few large tech companies and into a few government committees. And we've seen recently with the Homeland Security Committee that's been formed around AI safety, not a single advocate for open source is there. It's Microsoft, it's Google, it's OpenAI, and that, you know, is very disturbing. And so, you know, the Morpheus movement, the community that's come up to say, no, we got to build decentralized AI. It's been amazing to see the speed at which the community has built out this new technology. It's live right now. if you go to mor.org, you can download a copy of Morpheus and have a personal AI. You can go on to Venice.ai and have a personal AI that is private to you, that is just as powerful as a ChatGPT-4, right? And so AI is in the open source context catching up very quickly, and it's now reached parity with these proprietary models. And so, my hope is we'll continue to see this incredible momentum as more people adopt this open source framework, as they continue adding the code and capital and whatever resources they have, but to understand the importance of this moment, and that, we do not want to go down to the path where 99% of all human intelligence is run by a couple of centralized entities, right? It's the old Lord Acton, right? Tyranny and the concentration of power, and liberty in the decentralization of power. And I really believe that in my heart. And so, encourage people to check out Morpheus, to go to some of the community websites, and they can see what people are really building and deploying. But, regardless of what regulations, come into effect this July and August, it's coming very soon. There's a lot of urgency here, that we have the tools for people to continue accessing this intelligence, regardless of how they regulate centralized companies, right? That we have an open source and decentralized alternative. So I'll stop there, but I just want to give people that one concept, that there's an urgency here. You want a personal AI for the same reason you want a personal phone, for the same reason you want a personal computer, right? It's your access to really having, will and, free will in the world, is access to these technologies, right? And not to be left out of that. So really encourage people to lean in and learn more about that.
Yeah, and I want to underscore that obviously the call to action, that brought me to my recognition of this was really brought about by so many other influences that led to that point. But in the conversations, and I attended a medical AI hearing in D.C. With Senator Warren, Senator Wyden presiding. Some of the conversation was just on bias. How do you eliminate bias from your from your AI and your results? And then, obviously, as we built up to this event, understanding, how do you decentralize bias? I mean, bias is a natural byproduct of human thought. It's how we collectively decide what the cultural bias is, and understand what the source of that information may be. And if we want to really put our hands and future into the few major corporate entities that dominate tech, and also potentially dominate the impact of what goes into those large language models, without understanding how they're trained, the result is essentially controlling our thoughts, and then obviously with our the issuance of central bank digital currencies, the ability to control our money, obviously that just leads us down to a very, very narrow path at that point. So with that, I want to hand it off to our two freedom fighters in the group, really on the front lines, even more so, with Carlos Torriello and Ludmila Kozlowski, and I'm sorry, Kozlowska. I am so sorry. I mean, with a name like Vasiliotis, and like I said, Luda, so great to have you both with us. Please share with us, an overview of the projects you're working on, and how this is all, how Bitcoin has, particularly impacted you.
So first of all, I'm really, really grateful for being with you guys. It's really important moment. I think important moment not only for end users like me, persons who use Bitcoin to save lives, to protect human rights, but also for everyone who developed this important technology, giving us opportunity to exercise our freedoms, financial freedoms, having privacy payment instruments, or like Carlos, actually even defend rule of law and democracy, election results in our countries. And I mean, in our countries, in country where I'm from Ukraine, And I defend human rights in many countries from post-Soviet region, Russia, Ukraine, Kazakhstan, Moldova, specific our focus. But we also defend globally people who politically persecuted, who criticize the government, like entrepreneurs who refuse to cut off internet during massive peaceful protests, or just activists or their family members. And we became a voice for these kind of people abroad. And for these activities, because we were effective in releasing this kind of political persecuted people, we became a target. And 3 authoritarian regimes were able to disconnect, basically, effectively us from banking system in Europe. And this is the reason why we started to use Bitcoin, exercising our financial freedom rights, and also giving the rights for other people, teaching them how they can use Bitcoin for fundraising. For example, in case of Ukraine, we were using Bitcoin to buy the most important protective equipment since first hours of Russian full invasion, when completely everyone was paralyzed and banking system was collapsed. So we were able to deliver on the second day of the war, when Russia invaded into Ukraine, hundreds of bulletproof vests, helmets, medical equipment, and all of these thanks to the speed of Bitcoin. And for this reason, of course, we protect Bitcoin. And this is also a tool for everyone who financially excluded, just being accused in so-called money laundering, extremist, terrorist, politically motivated charges, which the most favorite tool for dictators to censorship, to basically isolate, exclude from society, from any kind of activity, critics of regime in majority of this world, because majority of this world is authoritarian states. And just few countries have this privilege to call themselves democracies, although authoritarian regimes, what my example proved, able even to eliminate your access to financial institutions and to terminate your bank account, even if you live in such country like Belgium. And this is what was my experience in my way, how I discovered Bitcoin, how I use it for my human rights work, defending our donors, recipients of the fund, our volunteers, workers, family members, and many, many others. I don't hear you, Dennis.
Yeah, I think you're muted, Dennis.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm sorry. I mean, truly inspirational. I met Ludmila at the Bitcoin Policy Summit in Washington just recently, and it really just lit a fire under me. We don't see the impact as much in this country as we do, obviously, with what you're doing abroad. Obviously, we've also, experienced some debanking in this country, but not nearly to the level of impact that you all have had. So, with that, I want to hand it off to Carlos. I mean, we were fortunate to re-meet actually after our initial meeting, probably 5 years ago, and and at that time, Carlos was being recognized for his work in the area of election integrity in Guatemala. He's been able to perfect that, one of the founding members of the Bitcoin education program in El Salvador, and took that to the next step and really talking about how we can create election integrity. And Scott, I may hand off a moderation to you on this, because I know this is a particularly near and dear subject to your heart. So, Carlos?
Sure. Well, appreciate the opportunity. My name is Carlos Toriello. I'm from Guatemala. That is next door to Mexico, in between El Salvador. So close by to the United States. I was born and raised here, and I joined the ranks of our volunteer army that carries out our elections, democratic elections. I participated in 2011, 2015, and really fell in love with the process. And then came back in 2019 to be an auditor of the process, or a political party representative for folks that were running in the race. And in 2019, Guatemala's election system collapsed very publicly. Folks ended up going to jail. And so for the first time since the early 80s, there were serious accusations of election fraud against the election system. And it was practically impossible to differentiate fake from real. Like, how would you trust? How can you trust the information that is being presented to the public when the databases that are feeding that information are malfunctioning in a very obvious and concerning way. And that's where we turned to the Bitcoin blockchain as a potential ally in this, and have discovered that it serves within the concerns that people have shared about AI. What I find very exciting about Bitcoin is that it can present itself as an independent arbiter of truth, or at the very least of carbon dating data as when something existed. Just the ability to be able to know the age of information is extremely valuable. In the same way that it helps us, when we find the fossils of dinosaurs, we learned a lot about how the Earth, evolved. In the digital world, being able to accurately determine the age of digital data might be the way for us to protect against a post-truth world where AI could potentially go rogue if our efforts to decentralize it aren't successful. And so in the case of Guatemala, in 2019, this happened. Just a lot of data that was created by the election system was called into question, and the only way to differentiate fake from real became using Bitcoin. Fast forward to 2023, and our work as election auditors led to a company called simpleproof.com, building a tool that the election authorities of Guatemala used in 2023 to protect the election system and avoid, basically learn from our mistakes. And sure enough, it has already proven to be incredibly valuable, as the election authorities were accused by the justice system of election tampering. The paper trail that supports and protects our system, that evidence was taken over by the justice system, ended up being manipulated. And so even though paper is fantastic, if the evidence is manipulated by anyone, then you can also, it's still election tampering in paper. Like, evidence must be protected in order for it to be admitted in a court of law, at least if a court of law values truth. And so as a result, the information that was placed on Bitcoin that can accurately determine what information was produced on election night is the only thing that Guatemalans can now trust from their election. And that is what is being used by the election authorities to protect themselves against spurious accusations of election fraud. So
I wonder if I can just weigh in there, because I do want to underscore a couple of points that Carlos has made, so that in the mouth of two or three witnesses, the truth comes out. The great advantage of what Carlos talks about as radiocarbon dating is really that it is so much easier to create conspiracies after the fact than it is to anticipate them before the fact. And so when you have an immutable record that at least records data at the time that it occurred and can't be changed afterwards, it doesn't prevent, but it greatly increases the difficulty of trying to rewrite history. And I'm also glad that Carlos, if I might just add my own little commentary here, emphasizes the benefit of paper, okay, is that it is inherently decentralized. These records are created at large numbers of different places across the nation or state that is engaged in election. And the fact that blockchain can be used as a kind of belt and suspenders system, namely something that is independent and therefore provides an additional layer of credibility to a system, rather than necessarily interfering with the safeguards that we already have in place, is a very important distinction that I think people should hear. And so the fact that we can create records that are stamped before someone figures out how things need to be changed after the fact is subtle but fundamental. And the fact that this is a system that can never be accused of weakening the existing systems, but only adding additional integrity, that makes for a very powerful, simple, logical argument for why no one that's really serious about wanting to get at the truth of what happened can object to. And I'm just going to take 30 more seconds on the mic to note that here's another very obvious example of something that is not necessarily a cryptocurrency issue, but is really about the historical record. And that provides its own benefit and vitality to the conversation.
I appreciate it. Well, if there is 5 minutes of time for me to show people actually how it worked, I believe show is more powerful than tell. What you are seeing on my screen is the actual website that reported the election results in Guatemala in 2023. It is managed by the election authorities, the national election authorities. You can see once we go into the election, it'll show us the national map of Guatemala. And then it shows under that the total results of how the 4.2 million people that showed up to vote distributed their preference according to the distribution that the system gave. I don't know if you're seeing my screen or not, but let's see it. There you go. And so as a Bitcoiner, especially as an election auditor, I care about the truth. And so this is a pretty database, but I want to verify. And in our case, we have this field box here where I can literally put any number between 1 and 25,000. I'm just going to put 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 because why not? And so instead of looking at the national level, I am looking at the individual voting table of that geographic location. And so these are the votes of about 400, around 400 citizens at this voting table, still in the same election. And so what the authorities are saying is the national totals are the the summation of all of these documents. But I want to verify. And so in our case in Guatemala, we publish these JPEG files that contain the actual handwritten numbers that demonstrate that this information is valid, which is what Scott was mentioning in terms of there are hundreds of thousands of people carrying out this process in a decentralized manner using paper as a way that allows anyone to, trust the results because they were present and they participated in it. However, once this file reaches the internet, the question is, how do we keep it from changing? Because digitally, it's very cheap to make changes. And that's where Simple Proof, the company that I'm now a part of, included this rather curious orange button that when you click on it, it'll take you out of the results database to a separate one where that Simple Proof is demonstrating that this document existed on the internet as of 12:42 in the AM of June 26, time zone GMT -6. This hash or signature is a unique identifier based on the SHA-256 algorithm, and it has been registered on block 795,968, which is what is serving as this timestamp using the time chain of Bitcoin. And then again, this timestamp of when that block existed, which was 12:45. So we can see that in the case of this document, as Scott was so eloquently saying, is it existed on the internet as of 12:42 in the AM, and by 12:45, 3 minutes later, it has already been registered to a database that no one can mess with, essentially. And so, again, here, what we're showing is mathematically how these proofs work, so that this Merkle or this SHA-256, this fingerprint of this file exists here, and we're showing you how through a series of mathematical proofs you can follow this line of mathematical proofs that all lead all the way up to a final root that is then sent to Bitcoin. And so here we have that fingerprint. And if you have your own node, you can use the transaction ID to find it. But we also provide a link to actually go into the Bitcoin blockchain, where this is no longer, something that is controlled by anyone. We're just using mempool.space as a service to find that transaction. And again, we see that the timestamp is from June 26 at 45 minutes in the morning. And now that we plug into the details, we can find that down here in that transaction, this hash SHA-256 has been present on the Bitcoin blockchain and exists as of that moment. So again, what Scott is saying is, by applying this to our election system, these files that you see, in Guatemala, we produced hundreds of thousands of these. And so now we have cryptographic mathematical proof of when these files exist, eliminating the possibility that anyone can change them after the fact with some malintent. If that conspiracy were to happen, then whomever decides to do that will have, there's proof. And so it's no longer about opinions about what you think happened. It is about mathematics and what can be proven. In the case of elections, that, for lack of a better word, trumps whatever opinions you may have.
Yeah, I just, again, I don't want to intrude on Carlos, but I feel it's so important that we underscore that this is not a theoretical thing that Carlos has done. When we were back, Stuart and I, in the air-conditioned, climate-controlled confines of Bell Communications research in our offices, we imagined that such a thing might someday happen. But Carlos is the person in the trenches that has made this a reality. And I've said it before, so I'll say it again. I think it would not be out of the realm of possibility that for these and going forward future efforts to preserve election integrity, that Carlos would easily be one of my nominees for the Nobel Peace Prize. And I don't mean that as an exaggeration. I think the significance of what has actually been put into practice shouldn't be understated. I wonder if we could get Carlos to comment for a moment about the fact that you were sort of on the outside in 2019 and came to be more accepted by 2023. I'm really quite interested in whether you feel that are there lessons learned there? Was this a story of patience and persistence? What in 2019, did you anticipate the impact that you would be having 4 years later, and how did that come to happen? Are there lessons that you can give to all of us about how to turn a possibility into a reality?
I would say it's lower your time preference. Persistence and determination are almost omnipotent. And so I was still an outside independent election auditor in 2023. So I was a third party separate from the election authorities, but our recommendations based on auditing were what led a group to propose the solution and the election authorities to remember, oh yes, this was something that was proposed and that we were shown could help us. And actually there's it was you'd be surprised how this can work. We the group that was the Simple Proof initially thought this would be an excellent protection against AI, and it's hard to prove a negative, right? Like, what would have happened in Guatemala had this not happened? Maybe our election would have been attacked by AI with fake documents. The fact that they used the system just from the get-go perhaps eliminated that, but there were new challenges. And so if I can share my screen one last time, I can show you quite literally what ended up happening and is now going to go into the court. Is what you're seeing on your screen on your left is a heat map of all of the documents that were generated on election night. And if the election authorities had not used Bitcoin, then what is on the left is the only record that would have been available to understand when things were created. These are called the meta fields of the files, specifically XIF, or date created by. And so you see these three columns, whereas on the right, what you see, and on the x-axis is time. So essentially what this is saying is, at 0 hours on election night, there were no files, but then as we get closer to midnight, there's a bunch more. And then about 12 hours later, there's the rest. So that's what the figure on the left is saying, is on election day, there were these kind of three moments where files seem to have been created. Whereas on the right, which is using Bitcoin blockchain as an independent arbiter, now we have this record, and you see that the three lines disappear and you get one single line. And so unfortunately, our election crimes unit and our Justice Department doesn't understand how cryptography works. And so they have neglected and ignored the box on the right. And they have argued in public that their evidence in court will be that there is this, what's on the left proves that there was election tampering, because this first line is 6 p.m. That's when the voting count occurs. And there's a fair number of files before then, which is to them proof positive that the files were created prior to the votes being counted, which proves election fraud. However, once we now have this independent database called Bitcoin, we have to reconcile what's on the left with what's on the right. And what this means, as you can see from my logo here, that's the Spanish version of Back to the Future, is that the fact that Bitcoin has most of the files generated on in and around midnight on election day means that this third line on the left is incongruent with physics and our inability to travel back in time. Therefore, meaning that the election fraud accusations by the losers who are attempting to destroy the Democratic Republic has to be reconciled with the fact that due to the data existing on Bitcoin, it means that the only person capable of committing election fraud would also have to have a time machine. Now, the existence of the data on Bitcoin suggests a more plausible explanation, which is the reason that there are three lines instead of just the one is that there was a misconfiguration problem of the time zone in the hardware. And so what was an honest mistake by a technology contractor would have been blown out of proportion to essentially destroy the legitimacy and the transfer and peaceful transfer of power. And so this is literally the case of the technology company that was contracted made a mistake, put the time zone of Africa and of some Pacific islands, and that created this illusion or this perception that could then be used in the stop the steal narrative of saying they're stealing the election because they are manipulating the results. But with the existence of independent data on Bitcoin that no one can change and hasn't been changed since election night, we can now see, wait, perhaps what happened, and this is all in the data, is that there was an error, and we can actually, what is more plausible? That someone made a mistake, or that someone has discovered time travel and chose to use their ability to travel in time to commit election fraud in a small Central American country, which I don't know that that's on the top of my list whenever I find a time machine. So it.
I assume that what's on the top of everyone else's list is knowing whether the Red Sox are going to beat the Yankees ahead of
Perhaps, yeah. And so,
I-
well,
I-
just to say that it was surprising. It is impossible to predict. What I care about is truth, and every time that I discuss this tool with people, it's clear to folks what you said, Stott, is that this only adds to the robustness of any election or information integrity. Using this tool does not benefit anyone except those that want truth, which forces people that don't want truth to publicly fight against our collective ability to reach truth. And so,
yeah, not only against tool, but also developers. And remember what's happened with judges and actually developers who implemented this very, I would say, the brightest actually solution for protection of integrity of election. And what's happened next? So authoritarian regimes, they go in after developers and judges who has authority to implement this tool. And what we try to do, we actually started to defend both developers and judges. It was a huge campaign. We started to make meetings both with members of the parliament in Europe. There was also support from US. I would say all countries, because when we showed what exactly guys developed and how it worked in practice, every elected politician said, wow. And I want just to show right now on a screen one of the documents, for example, recent one. This is Parliament Assembly of Council of Europe, united 46 member states on the European continent. And as you see, they looking for solution how to protect democracy from disruption caused by artificial intelligence. Why this document was important for us? First of all, because it was initiated by a person who was former Prime Minister of Greece and who is actually himself experienced financial exclusion because of abuse of AI and anti-money laundering countries regulation. And as you would see in the text, the most important is actually, of course, mentioning how Bitcoin blockchain technology is helping from one side to protect against financial exclusion, and abuses of existing anti-money laundering and counterterrorism financing laws, to repress their critics transnationally, which is also important, and also how actually democracies can benefit from a solution developed by guys from Guatemala to protect election. And this is one example how we teach, educate regulators, legislators in many countries so they can actually understand the value of Bitcoin, not only for activists from authoritarian states, where they have, as politicians from democracies, they have privilege. They don't care why we use Bitcoin, that it's for us the last resort, that is the only tool we have to exist, to fight and defend our basic freedoms, right? But at the same time, they found out that Bitcoin blockchain technology can be tool to protect integrity and their election campaign. And this is something extremely beautiful. I also was speaking about it in Copenhagen Democracy Summit. And again, there was only two things, the most important in discussion within politicians, human rights defenders, journalists, how to protect elections, because it's elections in Europe, soon in European Parliament, in UK right now, we know US, all of them asking for a question, how we can protect against AI abuse. So I think I really believe that we need to make it as much as possible vocal, this use case, and actually implement it as a tool to protect our electoral results and democracies.
I just want to, Dennis, if I could, for a moment.
Please.
I'm trying not to arrogate to myself more than my allotted time, but if we could just go back to Carlos's side-by-side slide. I just don't think the importance of that right-hand side can be understated. It is effectively, we talk about when people find a piece of evidence that's the smoking gun. This is the non-smoking gun. This is, no, it's an artifact. There wasn't any election fraud. and that this should be framed in the Museum of Liberty somewhere.
Agree.
There's also another aspect that hasn't yet come up, and that I think relates to Ludmila's comment about the AI issue, and that is, even if our voting is well protected, and here I'm tipping my hat a little to Shauna and hope she will respond. Even if it's well protected, what about the quality of the information that we use to make our voting decisions?
Mhm.
And I believe Shauna has something that ought to be talked about there on that, if you would, please. I hope I'm not pushing.
You're muted.
You're muted, Shauna.
You made it.
Okay.
There you go. Yeah.
I want to jump in. The one thing I love about blockchain is it brings that old adage that says the way to build trust is transparency. And if we look at AI and blockchain, the combination together is just magic for that. So Carlos, what you have mentioned is and shown us is something extremely important for the elections itself. But if we look at when the elections start, it is years even before. And it's the information that is leaked into society. And a lot of the issues that we're seeing today is AI is hallucinating, it's making up stuff, it's being used by nefarious people to start to cause issues in society. And so it is really a need for a 360-degree view of what the AI has said, and the who, the what, the where, the when, that is really needs to happen from the front end of any statement that's being made by any of the individuals. And is it deep fakes? I mean, that's something that Scott and I have been talking about for quite some time. How do we know, and how can we prove out who is actually stated the certain quotes that are being said in the news, and then in the end, who's the first one to say this, and where did that information start? So that was just the 30 seconds I wanted to jump in just to mention that, because it's almost like we've got a big puzzle here right now. And one of the things that just let me mention, deep fake prevention of blockchain, that is so important. Davos, they said the number one and the number two threats for the next 10 years, number one and number two is misinformation and disinformation. And it is not nuclear warfare. We have totally flipped the stages to it really being a propaganda war. So I would love to flip that back to Scott. And I know these are things that you and I have been talking and even doing some deeper dives into, and how to solve some of those global problems with the misinformation and disinformation.
If I may just interject real quick, I mean, obviously, Shauna, so much of what is happening, and so much of the testimony that came before our AI committee this first session was really questioning authentication. Pure and simple. How do you know the information that you're receiving is trustworthy? And obviously, trust mechanisms are so key to this, and its integration with crypto AI, decentralized AI, obviously, where you're going, from a regular start operating within the what we see as the emerging regulatory structure in the United States. What Luda's EU has been much quicker to implement regulatory structure, but obviously inspiring innovation. And how do we inspire innovation and regulate at the same time without shutting these folks down? It certainly is the product of our of the second half of our event, but and that's where I think we'll be able to get more insights from David and Eric. But Scott, let me hand it back to you. Obviously, as just part of this conversation, we've chatted offline on how open AI is not open. I mean, it certainly is part of the newspeak of the of our society. So perhaps I'll let you take it from there.
Well, I'll just make a comment that I hope draws out others into the discussion, and that is, I want to sort of go back to the point that Morpheus AI folks are valiantly making, and it reminds me of a statement made many years ago before AI was the discussion. And that is, there's a quote multiply attributed to a number of people that we look at as thoughtful about freedom of the press. And that is, freedom of the press is guaranteed only to those who own a press. And that really goes to the heart, in a very different technological era, of the decentralized AI issue. If you only have a couple of sources trying to remove the quote bias from the system, then it simply ensures that those couple of sources will have something that is neutral with respect to their biases. Whereas if we really want to let freedom ring, it's about each of us being able to form our own bias judgments, where bias, if we remove the negative connotation to it, we realize that it's simply the cumulative result of one's own individual experiences. It's your Bayesian priors for any statisticians that are sitting out there. And it's the framework that you come into addressing issues. And so, again, my role, I think, here is just to underscore these things. But if we each have our own personal AI, look in a sense respecting our best interests and directed by us, then if we have that state, then we have very little risk that we will be dominated by centralized and coercive forces. Whereas if we don't allow for that state to come into existence, then the odds of us remaining a free people are low. Have I mischaracterized the points that were made by the prior speakers on AI? And
No, I think you have effectively led us into the second half of our program, and really, to talk about how we got here with the movement toward the decentralized AI projects. And for that, I want to hand it off to David. I mean, as the Paul Revere of the industry, I can certainly say that I heard that first call back in November while I was at the North American Blockchain Conference, and recognized that this was really a unique opportunity for South Carolina, our state itself, to potentially create a regulatory carve out and underpin our manufacturing model as an economic development program with a transformative technology that incorporates both the cryptocurrency industries and the AI industry. So, David, perhaps you can give us a little background on how we got here.
Sure, happy to. And Scott, I think you hit it right on the head. It's all about having a personal AI that's aligned to my values and my preferences, and is connected to my data, and is controlled, importantly, by my private key, right? We can use cryptography to prove that I authorized this agent, that it's only controlled by me, right? And when I was talking about this with Eric Voorhees, one of the thought leaders in this space, and it sort of occurred to him, like, no matter how smart AIs get, they are not going to reverse engineer the laws of thermodynamics, right? They're not going to change the laws of physics. And so encryption and strong cryptography, we have those fundamental laws of science on our side, right? Protecting the proof of what we're doing with that private key. And so, and just to fill folks in, what Dennis is referring to is when the executive order came out, it really had a lot of overtones that were very similar to what we saw with the cryptography wars of the 1990s. For those that weren't around, back in 91, the government decided that encryption was a munition, right? And there was a bill proposed by Joseph Biden that there should be a ban on encryption for emails. So it would be dangerous to let people send private emails to each other or something like that. And so that inspired Phil Zimmerman, to famously release PGP as open source, right? Pretty good privacy, became one of the encryption standards. He fought the good fight for years, famously publishing his algorithms in books and even on T-shirts. 1995, he walked across an international border and asked to be arrested because he was disclosing this magical restricted math to foreign people. And so they arrested him. And what he was doing was considered a felony at the time. And he fought it in the courts. And at least in 1995, judges still thought that maybe language or math or things you could print in a textbook, maybe that falls under the First Amendment. And so he won in the courts. I think he won on appeal too, but never went to the Supreme Court. And so the government maybe didn't want to set too much precedent around how far that First Amendment goes. But it wasn't until 1999 that the government rescinded formally the restrictions on cryptography when Google and Microsoft finally showed up with some lobbying dollars and said, yeah, we kind of want to sell our software overseas. Maybe we do need this strong encryption thing. And so the government finally withdrew those restrictions. But you could basically say there were a 5 or 10 year period there where encryption was considered illegal. And so here we are, 33 years later, and it seems like a bit of Mark Twain quote, history never repeats itself, but it sure does rhyme. And here we are again, right? They've set some arbitrary limits now in this executive order about how big the models can be, and now you need KYC, your customer, check that driver's license if you want to open an account at a data center, right? So they want to permission who's allowed to use computers and compute, certainly not non-Americans. And so they've introduced all these restrictions, the most draconian of which is in July, or by the end of July, the Commerce Department will once again determine if open source weights for AI constitute a munition, a dual use technology. And so the comment period's open right now. So if you want to opine, go to the Commerce Department website and you can, put your 2 cents into the memory hole, and maybe somebody will read it. I don't know, but that's where we are, right? And you look at these restrictions; they're largely focused at the companies, right? They're talking about centralized companies to, their ability to train models or develop this technology. There's now going to be a licensing process run by Homeland Security. So it'll take some number of millions of dollars and some number of years to train a model. But let's call this what it is. This is regulatory capture, right? This executive order didn't pop out of the ether. Nobody at the White House wrote this thing by themselves. It was heavily lobbied for by Microsoft and Google and OpenAI, the same people that are now on the AI Safety Committee for Homeland Security. So this is largely a push to limit their competitors, right? Obviously, Google is terrified of losing market share. Why would I use a search engine if I can just ask my AI, right? And that's their bread and butter, right? That's where they make all their money, is tweaking search results, showing you advertisements. And so this is the backdrop. This is the history of where all this has come from, and that's what sort of set things off for decentralized AI. People to say, no, we this ought not to be controlled by just a couple of companies. There ought to be an open source alternative, and we're going to build it. We're going to build it right now. And so it's been amazing to see that evolve, and certainly Eric can speak to all the initiatives that are going on, the community that's formed, the incredible projects that have debuted, right, to really close that gap and make the open source alternative a serious, viable alternative for people that want to use an AI today. Something that's not a toy, it's not an inferior product, but something that's on par with ChatGPT-4 and OpenAI today. And so, that's been sort of the history of the last 9 months. It's been amazing to see. And so we may be entering this period once again where 5 or 10 years, obviously free speech should include language and math. I think everybody knows that. I don't expect these restrictions to hold up in court, but doesn't mean you don't need a Phil Zimmerman. Doesn't mean you don't have to fight for it and put up that good fight. And so I appreciate Dennis and everybody here that's, recognize the importance of this issues, and really putting a spotlight on it. So hopefully maybe we can accomplish this in a year or two instead of a decade this time when it comes to knocking down such an egregious infringement on our freedom. Go ahead, Scott.
I'm
Are
sorry.
there other ways that we can nip this thing in the bud? Again, I lived through those 90s, as I hope my gray hair attests. We're all glad that we know how the story ends. And yet I wonder if, as you say, what can we do actively now to foreshorten the time frame by which liberty triumphs?
Let me weigh in on that for a moment, because we've taken a pretty active approach in South Carolina. I posted in the chat a link to a petition that we launched at ETH Denver, really acknowledging the importance of enjoining the federal government to slow this process down. It keyed off of a February 2nd letter that was led by the Utah Attorney General and included 19 other state attorneys general. Obviously, just take an opportunity, look at the petition. I can give it's a bit.ly link, and I'm happy to post it through other sources. Perhaps Roger, you can do that through the other chat channels. But obviously, so much of this really is incumbent on the weights and measures that are going to impact us as of July 27th. It's an area I want to really kind of spotlight what Eric is doing, but what we're trying to do is appeal to our state attorney general, Alan Wilson, asking him to lead a coalition of AGs because of the impact that it will have on our AI regulatory committee. Essentially, after July 27th, they're not going to have a lot to do, quite frankly. So, and I've had this conversation with some of the folks out in Utah as well that led that fight. So we're hoping, that the cause of action that they stated in that February 2nd letter will be carried out, and we can kind of piggyback on what the AGs previously had done. And that also comes on the heels of the earlier letter that they wrote to Congress asking them to legislate against deep fakes and child sexual abuse materials. So there is precedent for the leadership at the state level, with the folks that have standing to challenge the federal government to take this on and get us, perhaps into an election cycle where there's a friendlier environment, to regulation and less regulation as opposed to more regulation. But Eric, I mean, you're particularly on the front line of this with your project. Perhaps we can get a little background on what you're doing and what you may be taking, the efforts you may be taking at this point to mitigate the exposure of your project.
Yeah, absolutely. So just a little shout out. I have my original Phil Zimmerman PGP book here, as mentioned previous, just as physical paper evidence that I was there for this whole thing, with the source code and everything for that we used to actually use to preserve our rights, since it was published in a book. So happened to just pull that off my magical wall of history of computing back here. So yeah, let me first address Scott's question a little bit, because I think I had, living through the whole Phil Zimmerman era and the whole Microsoft era, and being on the front lines then, I want to point out something that I'm not sure everyone realizes, and may be very unpopular to say. In America, at least at this time, if you do the math, and you can use an AI to do this if you have the right data, you quickly discover that anything that is roughly the will of the people is 0% correlated with the law and how the law works and how government works. What is almost 100% correlated is the will of corporations, right? And so when we fought this battle originally, we were close to losing this against corporate giants, which were driving the process back then. And what turned the tide of that battle was, of course, a lot of individual action, but it was really the individual action inside the corporations that changed how the corporations lobbied. And so if you want a more direct path to this, based on all my 35 years of fighting these freedom battles, because these never went away, by the way. It was encryption. It was all the neuroscience behind this. By the way, there's a ton of neuroscience in how you're manipulated on the internet right now. So people like me were hired in massive quantities by the tech companies to manipulate all of you. I personally didn't do that work, but a lot of my colleagues did. And this has to be changed inside those companies. If you want a more direct route to this, change the attitude inside Google. And a lot of us have levers to do that. Change the attitude inside Microsoft and inside OpenAI. That's your quickest path. If you got Google, Microsoft, and OpenAI, to a lesser extent NVIDIA, Apple, and a few others, to really fundamentally change their attitude on this, you would quickly see the federal government and all the other governments changing their attitude on it, because that's how the lobbying dollars flow. So all props to everyone in government that's battling for individual liberty, and that's wonderful, and I'm here to support all of you. But if you really want a direct line, change what's happening inside those corporations. And by the way, change the fabric in which they operate, right? Which is, I know, is incredibly difficult, but a few minor changes in the fabric of how the federal government deals with corporations would actually equal all of the outcomes that we want. Now, they're very difficult to get. So on the front lines, we have very proudly taken a stance to back, in particular, US corporations who have a more decentralized attitude about AI in specific, to fight against the large monopolistic tech companies, who, by the way, I don't like viewing them as our enemy in this. They are simply co-opted right now. They can be changed. They can be brought to the better side of this, to the freedom and liberty side of this, and we should attempt to do that. We should ask Google why it would not want individual liberty for everyone in the world, and more specifically in the US where it's based. And that should be a discussion that we're having. But in our case at the Lifted Initiative, we are here to organize all of the private organizations in the United States who are interested in supporting freedom tech, supporting liberty of the individual, supporting the founding fathers and the principles that the country was founded on, building of the people, by the people, for the people, which we have kind of lost in the modern zeitgeist. We are organizing those corporations in AI into a collective. Morpheus is part of that collective and we're very much active in each other's communities, and we're merging those communities right now very actively. But there's many corporations in the United States with many people in them that want these same goals. They just want fair and level playing fields to compete with Google and Microsoft and OpenAI and NVIDIA. And all we ask of the government is that you keep the playing field level. We don't want advantage for us or advantage for Google. We want a level, fair playing field. That's what we need. If we have that level playing field, we will bring freedom, democracy, liberty to AI for you. You don't actually have to do anything. We will do it for you. We just need to not be actively barred from doing that. And that's what's happening now. The executive order, the Corporate Transparency Act, which I have no idea how that thing got signed, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. These are all built to destroy competition. These are all built to destroy the ability for us, and there are many of us. We are legion, right? There's many of us out here just to compete fairly against Google, Microsoft, OpenAI. That's all we need. We don't need an advantage. We don't even need a hand up or a leg up.
Eric, Dennis, am I?
Go ahead. No, please go ahead. Yeah.
One company that you've left out of the discussion in a pointed way, in my mind, and I hope this is not too controversial a topic, is Meta, and the fact that Jan LeCun, who is head of AI at Meta, is, in my mind, one of the stronger and more articulate advocates for truly open and open source AI. Could others that are better informed than me like to comment on that?
Well, I've already done many things that would equal professional suicide, so I'll do one more. So Meta is a contradiction. First of all, Meta is not one thing. Meta is multiple things. So this is a bit of a nuanced conversation, but the company that did the most to coerce and enslave the human consciousness is Facebook, is Meta. They hired an army of neuroscientists to make Facebook addictive, to make it splitting of the country, to sow divisiveness, to allow the Russian psyop that has been operating for at least 40 years to divide the country. We've known about these things in disinformation defense for a long time, right? This is not news. You can go into the industries that support this and find this anywhere. What Facebook did is allow that a platform and a voice knowingly and very purposely, addictively, to enslave the human consciousness. And I can literally give a 2-hour talk from a neuroscience.
Well, I think that's well established. I was just suggesting that there's a wrinkle here.
Right, there is, because they are in a battle of titans. They are in a battle of titans with Microsoft and all the other great tech giants, right? And in that battle, many times, it is better to disrupt the playing field for Meta than it is to maybe support their overarching goal of total control of human consciousness,
world domination.
So on their path to world domination, they are throwing out a bunch of open source AI, which I'm grateful for, right? And that particular effort is wonderful. That's great. Applaud it. What I wish is the rest of Facebook would do that.
Sure.
What I wish is that the platform would open up and say, we are freedom tech, not 1984 incarnate, right? That's what I wish for Facebook. And that could happen. That could happen if enough people in Facebook wanted it to happen, right? And that's my message, is this is not fait accompli. This is not done.
Right. I was trying to be, and I want to hear David's thinking here, but I was trying to be responsive to your point, Eric, about the fact that the shortest path is through these corporations.
It is.
And it seems to me that this, in the grand scheme of things, relative to all of Facebook Meta, this small effort could be a wedge that we could drive.
I agree. Yeah, I agree 100%. We should support them releasing OpenAI. Absolutely. We should be cheering that, because we should be cheering what we like about what they do. Again, they're not one thing. They're a huge organization with many personalities and many powerful people in it. And Zuckerberg may not even be the most powerful person who's ever been there. Some would say it was Sandberg, right? So, for example, right? So we should absolutely applaud when these major corporations do something correct and right. And that is one thing I will applaud them for. Their releasing of OpenAI and their weights and everything else. Wonderful, great, love it. Please do more of that.
Yeah, it's interesting history.
If I may, David, just
Go
kind
ahead,
of
Dennis.
segue into that, because OpenAI, I mean, rather, Llama 3 is the engine behind Venice AI, correct? I mean, they've contributed to your GitHub. That's perhaps you can just elaborate on that and where that information is sourced, and the results that on the project that Eric Voorhees has launched.
So Morpheus and Venice specifically are model agnostic, but yes, Llama 3 is one of the models, the open source models that people can use there. There's a Noose Hermes fine-tune of that available, as well as other models, right? Mistral has a popular model.
I was going to
There's
say,
a number of them.
France's Mistral model hasn't come up yet in our discussion, and I also want to make sure that gets some exposure.
Absolutely. And just to address the point before, it's kind of funny how it ended up happening. Some hero inside of Meta initially leaked the Llama 1 weights, right? And then once it was out there, they said, well, we might as well, just open source it anyway. So it's impossible to say if that was sort of on purpose or not. But then you got Llama 2, and they put a lot of training into that. Now we've got Llama 3. Both the 8 billion and 70 billion parameter versions, and they're training up a 400 billion parameter version. Though there are some caveats to the open sourceness of the meta models. At a certain scale, you're supposed to register, and there may be some fees if you want to commercialize it at a huge scale. So it's not without limits. It's not necessarily pure open source, but it's a move in the right direction. And the other person I want to give credit to is Elon Musk, right? He open sourced Grok. At least the weights, maybe not all the training data, but the weights of Grok. It's a huge model. It's very performative. Within a day of open sourcing Grok, people were running it on Akash. They're running on these decentralized networks. You could use it for Morpheus and other projects, right? So we're starting to see some of those titans move, right? And this is what happened with Linux back in the day, right? One by one, they all saw the advantage. And now Microsoft is a member of the Linux Foundation and gives them $1 billion a year, right? So, open source tends to win over time. And I agree very much with Eric Bravik here that, that's how you move the behavior, right, is inside these companies, right? That's the lever that you can pull, right? And that's eventually what leads to regulatory reform, right? Just like it did with encryption in the 1990s. And so I think that's the place to put the thumb on the scale and make the argument, to these companies that they're going to get better performance at a cheaper price with a much more vibrant ecosystem. And in the end of the day, it's going to make them more money than if they try to play this little walled garden game. Just like the internet made them more money than if one person had ended up with a walled garden around, quote unquote, the internet, right? And so it's the same argument here. Exactly.
Yeah, that's right.
I wonder also if I could pick up on a phrase that David just made, and that is the real economic driver, of course, of the open source side of the light side of the force, is the vibrant ecosystem or the potential for it. How can we stimulate that so that we get the full benefit that only open source seems to bring? This is the old cathedral and the bazaar argument. What can be done there?
Eric?
Well, I mean, I think my answer will be the same as I previously gave, which is really all we need is a level playing field, and we will do what we do, because we are. Everyone working on all of our teams that I know of, they're truly impassioned to do this. They truly believe in the American dream, in freedom, in liberty through technology, in economic freedom, in all of these things. So we don't need help in that area. We are very vibrant. We just need for government not to get in our way on purpose. And then we need the corporations that control the top of the game not to legislate themselves into being in a dominant position and de-level the playing field, right? Which is what's happening all over tech, right? So it really is as simple as that. We could say things like, well, tax incentives are nice, and favorable regulations are nice, and small business associations are nice, and all these, and they are all very nice. But we don't need any of those things. We will win this battle. We will free the world if we're just left to actually do it. That is it.
Let me bring Shauna in here, if I may. Obviously, Shauna, you're working on, the front line of integrating AI into corporate groups, for customer service purposes, human resources, different applications, and spending some time with you off and separately. You're integrating, choices, for folks to, basically build their own AI, and for their responsive purposes. We're introducing, some other options now. Perhaps you can, go into what you're doing and how this might be integrated into existing businesses. I mean, it's such a big movement in this area. And exposing these other platforms into that same, into that platform is certainly an area I'm sure would be of interest to the businesses that are actually looking to implement now.
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity to share with you the work that we've been doing at Guardrail Technologies. We started the company a little over 5 years ago and have been in R&D mode for about 4 of those years. This last year, we went to market with some of the solutions that we've been building to really put those guardrails around the artificial intelligence. And so the focus of our company is to really be able to provide that 360-degree view of the data that the AI is using for its response. And our beliefs are that it's really important for us humans to have that transparency. Until every piece of data in the entire earth has been, has been verified on blockchain, we have a huge gap. And that's really where Guardrail can come in, is to take the black box of that data and really unwind it and say, okay, where did the AI come up with those answers? We go into the ether of all the information out there and then start to piece it together so you can see that full puzzle. And the transparency is really important. I'm highly concerned with a really big misunderstanding as to Gen AI. Gen AI, the new models of this AI are probabilistic. And so it is really a conundrum to say it's going to be accurate. What it is it gives you the next best answer. So a good example of this is if you ask multiple Gen AI systems, you go to Copilot, go to even, Chat GPT for the day, Gemini, any of those, ask it the same question. You will get different answers. Surprisingly enough to us, sometimes they're totally different with wonderful, beautiful explanations. We went and asked 4 different AI systems who won the 1982 World Cup. We had 4 different answers back from them with full descriptions as to who won it and very, very creative ideas. Now, one was right. So what do? At Guardrail, we have an immediate thing that pops up, and it's the fact checker of what the AI said. So we know what's correct and can pull that accuracy in. But it was interesting, some of the things that were said also by the AI, even though it was a little bit of a hallucination, it gave us some opportunity to do some research to say, why did it say that? And who said that? And could there be some inklings of the truth within the data?
Well, yeah. Scott, I mean, you're familiar with the project, and certainly your exposure on multiple levels. I mean, perhaps we can. We've got a little bit of time left. Perhaps you can weigh in on directions you're seeing and recognizing that the centralization of AI is really a critical element to maintaining our fight. Obviously, being able to fight for freedom and recognizing that center of control is exactly anathema to what we actually need in our ability to to utilize this invention to the benefit of humanity.
Right. I want to go back to one of the things that Shauna mentioned, and then let me use that to kind of pivot over to be responsive to your question. And that is, talked about tracking it down to the sources. And that's really what it's about. We want to get back to, I'm reluctant to call it ground truth, but I'm happy to call it ground data. Okay. What's the origin? What's the source of these different things? And it reminds me a little bit of when we talk about this decentralization versus centralization. Just as the internet was kind of spreading its wings, the World Wide Web and whatnot, the cable companies were starting to push an initiative that they called 500 channels. And they were going to turn it from a system that instead of having 30 channels, 28 of which you didn't want to watch, they were going to have 500 channels, 400 and some odd that you didn't want to watch. And what the internet came along and said, did was say, excuse me, it's going to be more like 100 million channels, because any of us is going to be able to put up our own website and effectively start broadcasting. And I think, to me, that's the echo I see when we talk about personal AIs, and just how much more vibrant the conversation is going to be, and then how important it's going to be as we form our own biases, our own personal sets of experience, that we trace things back to their proper source. The pursuit of truth is a complicated thing, but the pursuit of where did stuff come from and who initially said this and where was this first stated is a slightly more tractable topic. And I applaud Shauna and others that are working to do just that. I was in a setting with a number of Wall Street finance people and the attorneys that bill them last night, and a very, very open-minded, good group of people. I don't mean to characterize them as some sort of outcast 2%, but those folks were saying, well, how do we get to the truth? And I said, well, getting to the truth is sort of above my pay grade, but we can certainly get to the original sources and know where our data is coming from, and we can form our own opinions as to which sources we feel consistently produce reliable information and which sources have their own agenda that may be divergent from what we're trying to advocate.
Well, and I think one of the things that is when something is said numerous times, often the first time it's said, people are like, I'm not listening to it. But after it's said, 100 times, it becomes this weird quote unquote truth. And so we've been working to really uncover where that original source was from. The elections concern me deeply. We have been working on a program that will come out this summer that provides information on the elections and states, when a candidate says something, where was it originally said? Do we want to believe this information, possibly because it started in a country? The first time it was said, even though it's been said 1,000 times since then, was by a country who really doesn't like the United States. And it could be that propaganda being pushed into society. Now, we're not telling people how to believe. It's just more, here's the 360-degree view of where that data came from. You make your own choices. And as I've told my kids, if you want to believe a lie, you can believe a lie. I'm not stopping you from that, but here at least is all the information we can give you.
Conversation I had, back in 2020, and obviously with the move towards smart vehicles, smart roads, the Internet of Things, creating the authentication method of how do you know what you're actually being provided as far as the information, as an example with a Tesla, the headlight, is a headlight, but it could also incorporate a camera into it for its self-driving mechanism. Knowing that camera may have actually witnessed an accident and provided the the actual record of that incident, but recognizing how you can guarantee the authenticity of devices that are accessing sensitive networks, is still something we really haven't solved yet. I mean, in the big picture, how all these methods of input are authenticated and recognized as the source. I mean, do we have the technology yet to do that? Scott, perhaps.
Sure. I've noticed an interesting thing that was, I assure you, purely unintentional. But as I look at my image as it's broadcast, I see that there's a light just above my head. And I'm wondering if it's not giving a kind of halo effect to some of the things that I'm saying. That was fully unintentional, but I just thought it was worth pointing out. This really, I hadn't meant to interject this, but I should mention in passing that a company that I've been working with called Suremark is in fact going to, for a couple of leading states, starting July 4, provide a publicly verifiable, in the blockchain style sense, as Carlos outlined, authorized communications from the different candidates running in a number of congressional election races. It's something that we think, even in its early stages, and it is early, can help to clear out some of the clutter in the campaign debates by knowing for a fact whether a video is really that person speaking and therefore authorized and signed off on by that person, and that it can be known no matter what platform it appears on. It travels across the internet as a piece of media content that carries its own credentials. So that's one modest effort that a company that I've had some involvement with is also trying to make its own, small contribution to turning up the signal to noise ratio.
David, you and Eric are building the toolbox for this, along with a number of other folks in the ecosystem. I mean, your time frames here are certainly being pushed. On the bright side, we see that from a congressional level yesterday, in the digital asset space, we finally have a bill that is moving through the system, the FIT 21 Act, the Financial Innovation and Technology Act, that promises to provide us some of the guidelines that we need to bring about a more widely acceptance and definitions for digital assets. The obviously also the some of the language that we've seen in the regulatory efforts to really corral AI, or probably just the opposite. Perhaps we can end this segment with some commentary on where we go with regulation. Obviously, it's not the same environment it was when Phil Zimmerman stepped into the picture. We know we're going to have a much tougher go of it from that standpoint. So let me just leave it to that for discussion at this point.
I think I'd love to jump in. I think, Dennis, when you and I had first met, it was right after one of my testimonies to the CFTC, and I was chair of their blockchain committee for about 3 years. And during my statement, it was extremely important to me that the technology is changing so rapidly. It's almost like I wake up every morning to something new. That's even more so than it was 2 years ago when I testified. And my exact quote to them was, technology changes rapidly. And so regulators should not regulate technology itself, but rather its outcomes and impacts on individuals. Because as soon as we say AI, we're going to change the game and call it something else. As soon as we say certain technologies, I think it really just gives too many people ways out, and it also could cause weights on that technology that we don't want to have happen and stifle it. So instead, looking at the outcomes, looking at how it impacts the individuals, I think needs to be the focus of what those regulations say. So it doesn't matter how it's done, just don't do these certain things.
Yeah, I'd have to echo something similar to that. Regulating the technology itself is largely not possible. If you think it was, again, if you think the last 20 years, for example, were fast, this is not arithmetic. We're not on a straight line of velocity here. This is calculus. We are on an ever increasing, accelerating curve of innovation that is not only pulling away from us, but is pulling away from us further and faster every day. This is calculus. This is not arithmetic. So everything is related to time. And while we're sitting here talking, millions of people are innovating and changing the game right now. And so you're never gonna regulate the tech itself. You can potentially regulate some outcomes for humanity, right? So you can, for example, have penalties for people who use technology to harm humans in various ways. You can define what that harm is, and you can go after the bad actors who use some emerging advancing technology. If you think this finance stuff is crazy, let's just talk about biotech for 1 minute, right? And you will think, oh, wow, we have no money problems. We have serious biotech problems coming, right? You think you care whether people own your dollar? They own your genes, right? Like, what are you talking about? Like, the biotech implications alone, especially AI fueled, in the next 10 years are staggering. So you're not going to regulate the tech. You can regulate outcomes. You can try to define harm in various ways, and you can go after bad actors and bad AIs that harm humans in some way. But regulating the tech itself, don't even bother trying. You're just wasting your energy for something you could be actually impacting, which is regulating harm, right?
Yes.
So it really becomes a whack-a-mole situation. You shut one down, 3 more may spring up.
David, it's whack-a-mole on an accelerating curve. You need 1,000 hammers tomorrow, and then you need 3,000 the next day, and then you need 10,000 the day after that. You can't build them fast enough. It'll never happen.
Yeah.
Oh, Scott, you're muted.
It reminds me of the old nerd joke, and I apologize for injecting it, of this person that first hears about exponential growth, and he says, this curve is not only growing exponentially, its derivative is growing exponentially.
Right. Oh my God. Right, exactly. So that nerd joke applies here, right? Only to everything. And by the way, AI is self-referential already. So AI is building the code and weights that builds more better AI and builds synthetic data that then trains other AIs. What we're looking at in the future very quickly is an AI agent economy, an AI agent world where there will be more agents than humans very, very, very quickly. And they will be generating the vast array of all transactions and all data. And humans will be a small blip of all data and transactions, financial or otherwise, that occur. And your AI agents in 10 years will do everything for you because you won't even be able to directly participate in the economy. It will be impossible. It's going to happen so fast that you can't even have dinner and manage your finances. Like, that won't happen. Your AI will manage your finances for you, your personal AI, as David said.
Yeah. Well, and that's the point I think to take away here. Like, this is an inevitable outcome. So the only question is, who's the AI aligned to? Is it aligned to you, or is it aligned to somebody else? And it doesn't matter if that somebody else is a company or a government or any other group of people. There's only one way we get really good outcomes for lots of people. It's a personal AI that's aligned to you, right?
That's
and
aligned
that's what
to you.
that is what I am focused on day and night, because like, that's the battle to win. You can't lose that battle. That's the battle that needs to be fought right now, every minute of every day until we get there.
That's exactly right. It's about AI alignment. And everybody, most discussions about AI alignment that I get into focus on really totally the wrong things. They focus on these technology bits, and the geeks get up there and they talk about like the technical bits of how we align the AIs and everything. Alignment and control to who? That's the question, right? That's the fundamental question. If it's not to the individual, then we're done.
So when I was part of the AI ethics committee at IBM, one of the things that I continuously would say to everyone who came in front of us was, can we do it? Oh yeah, we can do it. Should we do it? So that is the number one question we as humans need to be asking each other. We can do, oh my gosh. With AI, some of the inventions that I've seen just blow my mind. They're not in the marketplace. Thank God they're not in the marketplace. We have to be so careful. We have something that is transitional, transformational, all the big words that we're putting out into society, and we are not being responsible with it as a human race. So I am very concerned about where we're moving forward. I think we really need to take that phrase of the should we and push that out as much as we can. As much as I don't want them regulating the technology itself, the outcomes in general, we always have to be striving towards those that are good for humans. Oh yeah, I mean, the last couple minutes here, my heart has just been going, wow. You know, we have such great opportunity, but we have such responsibility.
Yeah, and this goes back to the major corporations as well. I have actually been surprised by how much restraint they have shown in some cases for releasing things that could have made them money, but would be very dangerous. So there is a battle going on there inside the major corporations as well. And some of those battles have silently been won for us by people inside, not all, but some. And again, I'd like to give credit to those silent warriors inside those companies who have managed to make some of the right decisions about what was not released, right? Something to consider.
I want to underscore, maybe as my closing comment, what David was just talking about. And there is this word alignment, and it obviously has a technical meaning in reinforcement learning with human feedback and how you fine-tune models. But the bigger alignment that I hope we're all talking about is one that my son, who was one of my sons who was an economics major, he said, to sum up all of economics, it's incentives matter. And the alignment we're talking about is we want to make sure that the core incentives of personal AI are aligned with our individual incentives. if we can get that part right, everything else will kind of unfold, will just play out. But what we're trying to avoid is the Tim Cook warning. You know, if you're not paying for it, you are the product, and that is a misalignment on a grand scale. So,
and that really raises the question. Obviously, we understand how big tech monetizes our data now, and we are the product, and how that impacts, the centralized uh, uh, models, and how that impacts us as the fact that we are reading or that we assume is fact by the information that's generated by the AI. It really gets to the level of. I mean, I like to equate it some of the most obvious things, with monetizing products in movie placement as an example, and and placement for goods. In some of the conversations I had, I know that's not currently the law in the EU, but we can still do it in the US. So, there are differences in the way that we can create these incentives, but but also differences in the way that the big tech is going to monetize the investments that they've made in these areas. I mean, any thoughts on that? Certainly as closing comments, or what we may look for down the road, from big tech, assuming we don't, get the necessary internal structure, that recognizes the importance of this.
I think I'm just going to go with some of my experience working at IBM and at Dell in leadership positions. And I will say the big companies are going to do the right thing. Now they're incentivized by customers, but then like a company like IBM being around for over 100 years, they have gone through many different iterations and transitions and multiple different revolutions in general, that they're going to help society move to the next level. Some of the newer tech companies that aren't as old as like an IBM may have some issues with responsibility because they don't have that loyalty to the market for over 100 years. I think that's one of the biggest concerns that I have there. But I think if we have a few of these who are at the leading the helm, like an IBM, I think we're going to be good as a society. That's just my 2 cents, having worked there and having seen how important the AI ethics committee was. And then when I was at Dell, I was one of the first members to put in place our AI ethics committee there about 2 years ago. So there are people trying, and actually that brings it on a good point. Depends on the executives.
Right.
If we have some good executives out there, like the executives at IBM, or even, ServiceNow, Bill McDermott, they're looking to do good in the society, and they're wanting to help make those changes and help bring people in a transition to the next step in society.
Got it. David, Eric, final comments. Scott, I'll give you the final word.
Sure. I put my faith in the free market and open source, and I think we are rapidly seeing that emerge with fully decentralized and truly open source personal AIs. They're a reality right now, and thanks to Llama 3 and other great models that have come out recently, the open source tech is caught up with all those proprietary models. So I encourage people, stop giving Microsoft $20 a month and just go download a personal AI. Use it on Venice.ai. These alternatives are here now, right? And the revolution is where we don't need companies, right? Look at a movement like Morpheus. There's no company, there's no foundation. It's entirely a community-built effort that doesn't just reward the compute or the capital, but the coders and the builders of the applications and of the AI agents. That's the path forward, in my opinion. Is Web3 and crypto has created a way to monetize open source and pay the average developer, the average person. There's now a $2.5 trillion industry, right, that is paying people to build this open source public infrastructure. And so just encourage people to lean into that. I don't think we're going to solve these problems by using the old models that created them, right? And so I think we have to move to a new way of building, and that's through free markets and open source. So that's my final thought.
Yeah, and obviously the AI projects that are using crypto are, I think to quote Eric, almost none, right? Except for obviously what we are doing here. So and what we're discussing at this point. So Eric, I'll let you final
Well,
thoughts.
I mean, so in an age where all information and all technology is accelerating away from us is faster and faster and faster, where most people cannot even comprehend the space, and then it's already changing. I would offer maybe an anchoring counterpoint in different language. I still ask myself every day when I wake up in the morning, is what I'm building of the people, by the people, and for the people? So those words from Lincoln are very old, but they are still a North Star for me. So every day I wake up and I say, is this creating a world filled with individual liberty, or is it helping to destroy that liberty? So while I fully embrace what David just said, I think there is a counterpoint of have a North Star in all of this chaos, in all of this technology, in all of this information, in all of these flows. You still need the North Star of why are we doing any of this? Why? Not what, not how, right? But why? So every morning I wake up and ask myself that question. And I think everyone in AI, everyone in technology, everyone in crypto, everyone leading these reforms should have a similar North Star every time they wake up in the morning. And mine is of the people, by the people, for the people. And I still build to that every day. And that would be my closing statement.
Scott, obviously we've got millions of people, that aren't even keyed into this yet, and obviously it's moving so quickly. That how we democratize and decentralize, the industry is going to happen. But how do we educate? And perhaps just to include that as part of our your own closing comments and takeaways from from today. And
Sure.
love your input. Yeah, I mean we're the guys with the gray hair here. That's one of the reasons I was attracted to Eric was he had that gray hair. Needless to say, so we've got a little more background in this, just from a life experience standpoint. But
I guess my closing thoughts are technological, meaning not about technology at all. They're about the gratitude I feel and the for having been able to interact with people like you. What started out for us as a kind of intellectual exercise a long time ago, to see people on the front lines that I feel I can claim I'm aligned with, makes me very grateful. I'm thankful for this opportunity to work on issues that matter, and so my final words are just thank you.
yeah, and, let me repeat that. I mean, obviously, I want to thank everybody for participating. I am so grateful, for having the opportunity to have a common interest that really brought us all together. And and we haven't gotten to everybody's individual Bitcoin story, but I find that is such an amazing area, to begin a conversation, in the recognition of what it really means to have a self-sovereign ability to to transact, and private and permissionless, the ability to exchange value. And now we're in that in the phase where we're really looking at it from the standpoint of how we share our thoughts and create the consensus mechanisms that provide the next step to our individual liberty. So I want to take an opportunity to thank everybody for participating. The folks that had to leave early. Needless to say, I think we have lots of platforms for additional discussions and to continuing this series, which we will certainly be doing. And then I also want to take an opportunity to really thank our sponsors, Phoenix Technologies, Citizens for Sound Money, Satoshi Action Fund, the Turnoff law firm, and as well as I need to pull my list back up here. State Farm Insurance. So it was really interesting to me that just for a little quick background, I really realized it was mainstream when my personal insurance agent checked with his corporate groups to participate in a program that included references to Bitcoin. I mean, there's so many folks that still look at this as dark money as opposed to the freedom money aspect of it. So, I think it speaks volumes, to the level of what corporate America can do, and as it recognizes, the need for personal freedoms, and so much of what we've talked about, how we may change this program. It's a matter of time, it's a matter of effort, it's personal initiatives. As the byline says, join us at Liberty and Tech, subscribe to our YouTube channels, join us on our social media channels. Let's make this fight the right fight, and take the time to learn. At 68 years old, I can tell you that I have better recall than I had at 38, simply because this is an area that I find interesting. It inspires me every day. But really, at the heart of this, I entered this for the benefit of my kids, bottom line, and making a better world for them. And if we all take that to heart, I think we recognize what's really important in this life is passing on our individual freedoms, our ability to relate our interests in a free and open society to the next generation. So I want to thank you all for that. So I'm getting a little teary-eyed, so I'm gonna end it. So, David, I'll look forward to seeing you in Austin next week. And Eric, if you're going to be there, obviously look as well. And Scott, our continued conversations, as well as Shauna, we have some additional business to talk about. So
Yes.
we'll leave it at that.
Yep,
Thank
we'll
you.
all be in Austin, so we'll see you there.
Excellent.